Welcome to the show. Welcome back, everybody. Fixing stuff. We got Philip Ittner on a little bit early in the process. I'm going to let's see. I'm going to turn on
I'm gonna
your noise
mute.
gate for us. Yeah, it's okay. You're okay, Johnny. In that regard, and I'm going to turn off his auto gain because this, and we should be good. That should help a little bit. Okay, now, welcome. Lots going on, Phil. Glad to have you here.
Yep.
You did a vlog this morning. I watched it. I have since, by the way, there was a firefight in Rostov-on-Don since they took that place over. There was a Russian airstrike on a Wagner column on the M4 highway in Voronezh, and they hit civilians in the process. Yeah, Voronezh. Voronezh. Yes, finally I can pronounce it. Thank you for being here.
There you go.
People are coming up and giving water and food and in some cases cash to Wagnerites.
Yeah.
This woman was caught on tape. I saw it early this morning giving water to a Wagnerite, and somebody filming her said, "Why'd you do it?" And she goes, why are you giving them water? And he goes, "Well, they look thirsty." That was it. Like they look tired. They must be tired. And I'm like, yeah, that's a great way to cover. So, all right, catch us up on what you've been hearing, what you've been seeing, your take on this stuff. Yeah, have at it.
I just got off the phone with a Russian colleague, friend, contact in Russian meetings and Russian journalists. So I kind of hashed it out with him a little bit. We talked about several things that I'm sure we'll bring up in the conversation that we have today. This is bad. This is bad for Vladimir Putin. This is bad for Russia. This is a inflection point. He's not. He will. The rest of there will be a point before this and a point after.
Right.
It will never be the same for Vladimir Putin after this. Just like it was never the same for him when he had to transition to be prime minister because the Constitution limited him to 2 terms as president. I mean,
right.
It's one of these things where when we look back on the path of Vladimir Putin, this is going to be a moment in time when things will change for him. He will not survive this the same way as before. Now, my Russian friend says, yeah, he equates it more with Mussolini's March on Rome. When Mussolini tried to seize power in the 30s and he marched, or was it the late 20s? When he marched on Rome and he forced the king to give him a portion of power. And it was never the same after that. Eventually, it was just Mussolini rising to power, rising to power, rising to power.
Right.
If Putin is seen to acquiesce to Prigozhin in any way, shape, or form, it bursts the bubble of him being the guy in charge of everything. He's the man. He is the state. He is everything. He is the central power in Russia. Russia is Putin. Putin is Russia. If Prigozhin can manipulate him, or force him to do something that maybe he didn't originally want to do, he'll never recover from that because he won't be the big macho tough guy.
Right.
And he's broken pretty much every promise he made to the Russian people. So I mean, he doesn't walk away from this. And then if he sides with Shoigu and Gerasimov and somehow beats Prigozhin in the Wagner, which really is just Prigozhin. If he beats Prigozhin, he's still going to be seen as kind of like beholden to the Ministry of Defense guys who Prigozhin is kind of right, have not been doing that red hot in Ukraine. Prigozhin walks around with the mystique of having conquered Bakhmut, rightfully or not. And that gives him a lot of cachet in Russia. Shoigu has had his moments in the sun, and then he has been kind of out of favor. Currently, he has been in favor. He's been on TV every single day. Russia is a very controlled information sphere. Everything is pretty much controlled by the state, except for the people who are savvy enough to have VPNs and stuff.
Right.
But if you're an average Russian citizen, certainly in the provinces, certainly of a certain age, you're getting all your information from one source, and that's the state.
Real quick. The one of the factors in this, and we have a little bit of like extra audio coming from your way, Phil. So I might mute you when I ask a question. I'll unmute you. Um, um, One of the things that we hear, that have sort of been a standout aspect of this in the last little bit is this video that Prigozhin put out saying that the reason behind the war, the idea that it was because of NATO expansion, or there was something happening on February 24th that we had to do it, or that the Ukrainians were ramping up attacks on the Donbass. He says that's all garbage. And not only does he say it was a lie to start with, and that was, that reasoning and that sales pitch was baloney, but that it was started by the Ministry of Defense, Shoigu and those other guys, and the regional governors and military commanders in the Donbass, who were effectively bleeding the place dry, effectively just stealing from it. And they only started this because they wanted more area to steal from. That was his thing. The whole NATO expansion storyline, he said, is garbage.
Yeah, he said the whole NATO expansion, the whole Ukrainian aggression against Donbass, that was all a false narrative. That the Ukrainians had no intention of actually attacking the Donbass. That they restricted their attacks to Russian military units. That this idea that they were attacking civilians in the Donbass, that was BS. That's the central narrative that's come out of the GRU and the Kremlin to justify what they're doing. So he is in effect saying the war is complete BS. Mm-hmm. It has been created, and we have marched into this war on false pretenses, and he's pointing the finger at the intelligence community, at the military intelligence community, and against Shoigu in particular. Again, if you watch my blog, I talk a lot about how they have tried to keep Putin out of this because it's important that because of the Russian government is created, the center must hold, and Putin is the state, so he must survive. So it's not that Putin made any bad mistakes in his war in Ukraine; it's that he's been betrayed by the boyars beneath him, and that is a thing that we have seen throughout Russian history. What normally would happen is that the boyars, who are the subordinate command, Shoigu, Gerasimov, they would fight it out amongst themselves, and then a victor would emerge, and then the Tsar would side with that. So the Tsar doesn't get his hands dirty. Putin has, in some ways, had to come down off his perch on high and get involved, and that's not a good look for him either. He doesn't come out of this. He does not come out of this unscathed. How bad? I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see.
Well, part of this is he fled. The theory is that he's fled. That he is. I mean, both of his planes have flown to St. Petersburg, so he is no longer in Moscow for fear that the Kremlin will be the site of an attack of some sort. Either his own men turning it over to him at some point. Hold on one second. We get audio. I'll fix that or whatever. Of his own men turning it over to the Wagner guys when they show up, which would be horrifyingly embarrassing, or an actual, gunfights on the street of Moscow, which seems like our only two options at this point, other than them being stopped, I suppose, outside of Moscow in a huge fight on the outskirts. But if they break through, or any of their, associated, Wagnerites or sympathetic Russians, any of those folks inside that barrier, inside the fortress of Moscow, if any of them decide that now's the time, and what better time would there possibly be?
Yeah, how much time do we have before break?
We have about a minute, 2 minute and a half.
Okay, plenty of time. Here's the difference. Okay, I do not see this as being a street uprising or a street revolution like we have seen in Russia in the past. This is going to be a palace coup supported by armed units connected to those various factions within the power structure. Why do I say that? Because I don't think Russians are going to want to go on the streets again. They did it in '91. They went through the awful '90s. The trauma. The Russian people have been really traumatized throughout the Soviet Union, into the fall of the Soviet Union. I don't think that there will be, and I don't think that they will take to the streets.
My argument would not be that the Russian people are going to be not going to be in a street fight.
No, this
my thing
isn't going
is
to be a street revolution. This is going to be a palace coup, not a street coup. And it's going to be armed factions on the streets of Moscow. But the people themselves, like we saw in '91, with them going up on the
no.
streets, and you remember that scene with Yeltsin on the tank?
Oh, sure.
That ain't going to happen. That ain't
I
going to
agree.
happen.
I agree. We
Right?
got to take a break. When
This
we come
is
back, I'll bring up sort of the latest. 4 minutes ago, the Kremlin soldiers are mining the paths that the only other options, if they can't blow up the road, they're mining them around Moscow and the highway around there. You can see the mines on the street. We'll be back right after this. It's the House Parts Radio program, mega worldwide on WCPT Radio, Chicago's Progressive Talk. We're talking about Russia's civil war, which is in full swing right now, it seems. We'll be back. You know what? A couple of things have happened in the last, like during the break. This is how fast this is moving. Philip Ittner is still with us, at Philip Ittner on Twitter, 1L2Ts. He did a vlog this morning from Kiev about what's going on in Russia right now and kind of catching people up. If you need a shorthand explanation of the history behind this, that's a great place to go. Go to his YouTube channel. Johnny Million is here. He's going to be farming questions from the chat. I'm sure they have a ton. We already had them before you even showed up, Phil. But right now, in the last less than 10 minutes, the bridge over the Moscow River has been dismantled. Shots are now being fired in Rostov-on-Don, which is the first city the Wagnerites took. And the Ukrainian forces have launched an offensive in several directions in the east simultaneously. They are taking this opportunity as a huge go-ahead. And by the way, on a lighter note, the Moscow mayor said Monday will be a non-working day to minimize risks. They're expecting this to go sideways and the city to effectively be incapable of pushing anything. But don't worry. Even though the Wagnerites have attacked, Putin has retaliated by removing their posters from all around Moscow. I'm not kidding.
And you can no longer buy their merch. You can no longer buy their merch.
Yeah, well, that'll show them.
Stores.
They have merch?
Yes, of course they have merch. Everybody's got merch. ISIS has a very shiny magazine. This is 2023, Johnny Million. Also, and we'll
magazines.
That's right, zines. Yeah, I learned that on the ISIS Substack or whatever. No, anyways, so this is. We might as well jump straight into some of the questions because I know people have got some backed up, and I've got some stuff to talk about as well. But I want to, see if I haven't clarified anything so far that they still need to know about. That's in there. So fire away, Johnny Million.
Okay, yes. I'm sorry. I was just reading the chat. So this is from Sherry P. Could this be a ploy by Putin to save face? Got to pull out of Ukraine to defend the motherland sort of thing?
No. I mean, I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but it's been really interesting watching people try to wrap their head around what's going on. Like there's a mystery to it. Like there's the conspiracy through it. No, this is what it looks like on the face of things. This is a guy who
what it says on the tin.
A lot of power. He was given a lot of power. He was given a lot of leeway. Putin pit his subordinates against one another in the hope of finding somebody that he could pin this on, and it's gotten way out of hand, and now things are spiraling out of control. I don't think there's any depth to it more than that. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think this is legitimately happening the way it's happening. And it was in many ways predictable. I know because I predicted it. So,
see, this is why Phil and I get along.
This is happening, folks. This is real. This is the Russian military having failed miserably in Ukraine, trying to find trying to find a way out. Yes, but also having to wrap their heads around the fact that they are being soundly defeated in Ukraine, and they can't. It's the Russo-Japanese war. They're going to try and find somebody to the humiliating defeat. They're going to find somebody. They're going to try and find somebody to pin it on. And Putin was hoping to find somebody either on the Shoigu Gerasimov side or on the Prigozhin side to pin it on, or even the Kadyrovs. Have you seen the Kadyrovs? The Kadyrovs said they're coming to fight the Wagner guys, but we got stuck in traffic. you guys, you're in APCs. The
Yeah,
traffic are a
there
bunch
is
of
no
like
traffic.
Russian Lada cars. You could roll over them if you wanted to. No, I mean it's just the disintegration of control in Russia because Putin has mastered himself as the state is Putin. Putin is the state, and now he's the military adventurism that he thought genuinely, I believe, thought he could win here in Ukraine. It's been a humiliating defeat, and this is what you get. So I don't think there's a conspiracy here. I
No,
don't think there's
I
machinations.
saw my favorite thing yesterday, late last night, was watching Aaron Mate and some of those guys all going, you could see them trying to crowbar this thing into their empty craniums as a psyop or as a like fifth, dimensional chess and all this stuff. And it is simply macho idiots in a match of urination between each other that blew out of control because they're violent alcoholics, the vast majority of them, and they have no raison d'etre for the activity they're engaged in, so they turned on each other, and it's a ship mutiny. It's just on a bigger deck. This has happened in the world. This is not that weird. This is the Russian military plan is now equivalent to those people who are trapped, I think, in the Canadian wilderness, in the 1600s or whatever, and they insisted on carrying the desk with them even when they ran out of food because they'd lost their minds. And we need to be able to write down our rules for the group. So we need to bring a desk, obviously, and they left the food behind to carry the desk for a long time, and then they eventually ate each other. This is just a political version of the Donner Party that's happening. It's not a mystery, and it's not surprising if you actually believed what was happening as it happened. If you looked at it and said, yeah, this is pretty clear. These guys are yelling at each other. They're threatening each other with violence. In some cases, they're attacking each other. Of course, there's a version. This is where this is headed. The only reason they got confused is because I just don't think they will allow themselves reality. That's the only reason I can think of it. Let's grab another question before we get to the break.
I can't wait. Before you do, though, I can't wait for the tankies to melt down.
Oh, my God. It's already happening. It's already happening.
I know. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Now, this question has been asked a few different ways by many different people, so I'm not crediting just one. This is the big one, and it's what I think a lot of people thought. If Wagner wins, is that worse?
No, because I don't think Prigozhin wants to be the president of the Russian Federation. It's not in his DNA. I don't think the Russian people would accept him. They don't want him at the head of the Kremlin. They don't want him as the head of state. He's
and
not
Prigozhin is Wagner?
Yes.
Prigozhin, okay. Sorry, yeah, Prigozhin is the head of Wagner. Wagner really is Prigozhin. So if you can take out Prigozhin, Wagner kind of dissipates because they kind of idolize him. There's this loyalty thing, and if you chop off
same thing with Kadyrov.
And same thing with Kadyrov, exactly right, and arguably the same thing with the entire Russian Federation with Putin. But if Prigozhin is successful, quote unquote, whatever that is, I think the best he's going to hope for is to be Minister of Defense, or what I refer to as the Gray Cardinal, which is the guy in the background making all the puppets dance and all the machinations. Now that could be some backroom deals and smoking rooms and the room where it happens, to quote Hamilton. I know you hate Hamilton, but anyhow, no, it won't be worse. It just because there's also been this talk of like, could somebody worse than Putin come into power in Russia, and that would be worse for everybody. The Russians, having having had this period of Putin autocracy, will not look for a Putin clone, or further down the road of the autocracy and the belligerency that Putin has adopted in the last few years. They're going to want to change course because this is going to be catastrophic for them yet again. So they're not. You don't just replace Putin with a worse version of Putin. You course alter. I think that's what the Russians are going to do. I think the Russians will course alter. I don't know what it'll look like, but also in addition to that, this could get to a point where, a functioning government may not be possible. You might have, an executive branch
Yeah,
not judicial,
the Duma,
executive,
right?
and the Duma, not the executive in the president in the form of Putin, but the legislative in the
Right.
form of the Duma, in complete and utter disarray. There might not be a functioning government. I mean, we don't know. We're in uncharted territory, and I'm not going to ruin my batting average by swinging for the outer the cheap seats. We don't know. We don't know. But this is a huge deal for Russia. And think of Russia's history. They've gone through massive upheavals
Yeah.
in the last 30 years. There are people still alive today who are in their 60s who had their lives completely upended in 91. And, it's this is going to get worse before it gets
Yep.
better for Russia. But we've talked about that in the past.
There's according
Ukraine,
to
meanwhile, it's going to have a great old time, because who wants to be a Russian soldier right now facing an onslaught of Ukrainians while behind you, your family, your home, your nation is ripping itself to shreds? And who am I supposed to support? Am I Kremlin? Am I Prigozhin? I mean, if a Ukrainian armed column is advancing on my position and I'm a Russian soldier in a trench right now,
yeah.
am I really going to fight with everything I've got? No. So the Ukrainians taking advantage of this is to be expected, but also just very smart, because
Apparently, this is breaking news, by the way, and we'll take a break or whatever, that Lukashenko has been in contact with Prigozhin to start what they call a pool of the first and negotiate a stand down. Possibly at the moment on the table is an absolutely profitable and acceptable option for resolving the situation with security guarantees for Wagner PMC fighters. I gotta say, I call BS. There's no way that like, you'd have to be an idiot to accept those things. They're just gonna. What are you gonna do? They'll grant you 6 weeks and then they'll push you out a window? What are you, nuts? They'd all have to leave the country. What are they going to do? Like, we'll let you flee to Africa and live there like kings with the money that we just found in your other area? Like, goofy. We'll be back right after this, by the way. Yeah.
Ice pick.
Right, exactly. That's right. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide. We were talking during this break about the fact that the Kremlin / Putin / wherever he is apparently preparing to declare martial law in Moscow, and then a bunch of these oligarchs and folks are on their private planes. They are getting out. There are planes flying out of Moscow. You can see them, tracking through the air. Yep, through this. And
this is why I chose this painting.
Right.
This is why I chose this painting. This is a painting from Ilya Ripin, who was a Ukrainian-Russian painter in the 19th century, depicting Tsar Ivan the Terrible killing his son because he brought him bad news about the military offensive in Crimea. This is Putin. Putin is killing that which he proposes to love. Mm-hmm. And I've been saying it for a long time. But yes, I wanted to make a point, Hal, and thank you for letting me do this here. Mm-hmm. Is that we were talking about martial law being imposed in was it Moscow or Russia?
Moscow in general, but they're prepping it. But Russia in general.
Bet St. Petersburg is probably in there.
Yes.
I'll bet Yekaterinburg will probably be drawn into there. Vladivostok, all the major urban centers, I'm betting will eventually. It does.
My bad. It does not make a distinction about Moscow. It just says the Kremlin is preparing to declare martial law. Period. So yeah,
no, this would be all the major urban centers would be my bet.
Right.
But they might just go, because look, history. This is something my Russian buddy before I came on here was telling me, is that you also have to recognize that in the vastness of Russia, generally revolutions only really happen in the major urban centers. If you look at 1917 and the Bolshevik, well, not the Bolshevik Revolution, but the revolution that overthrew the Tsar. That really only happened with a bunch of sailors who then got a bunch of other guys to join them and overthrow the Tsar in St. Petersburg. It was localized in St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. In 1991, the overthrow of the Soviet Union was by and large done on the streets of Moscow. So, if you can control either the first capital or the second capital, and that's how the Russians refer to Moscow and Petersburg, then you can change the course of the country as a whole. But when you talk about martial law, and this is what I wanted to talk about coming out of the break, and I save for now.
Yeah.
Putin has broken every single contract that he made with the Russian population, with the Russian people. When he came in, he made a deal. We're not going to have the chaos of the Yeltsin years and the post-Soviet collapse. I will bring order. You might have to, have a little bit of corruption with a traffic cop, or somebody, if you want to do some business or that business, you might have to slide somebody some extra bucks, but there won't be chaos as it was under Yeltsin. Right. I will bring you back to prestige on the global stage, Putin said to his people. He's done the exact opposite. They're totally pushed out of the rest of the world, and the trading system and travel and all the rest of it. So that's gone. But by and large, this thing of like, if you have to bring in martial law, it means you are no longer in control. And Putin promised control. And he's let the Russian people down on that. This is just going to be more and more chipping away at Putin's prestige as the leader who's going to, the great Russian leader that will go down in history as, having saved Russia in the chaos of post-Soviet Union. It's not. I mean, I don't know when the next presidential. I was going to look this up. I don't know when the next presidential election is in Russia.
Right.
But he's either deposed or he's voted out.
Right.
And voted out is tricky because democracy in Russia is not existent. It's all
exactly.
manipulated. But if you really, nobody's going to vote for Putin. And if the vote then comes back that he has 110% of the vote, people are going to be like, excuse me now?
Apparently that, by the way.
I saw it in Bolotnaya Square.
Yeah. 11, let's see, about 5 minutes ago, a post came up that said a Wagner convoy of about 5,000 soldiers is approaching Moscow. Wagner has an S-300 air defense system with them. They are bringing in, anti-aircraft stuff and huge, beyond the APCs, they've got, all kinds of military vehicles as well. Pretty crazy. And you saw Putin's statement earlier today, I'm sure. He made, Putin finally came out and made his appeal, and he tied it all to 1917 during World War I, when he goes, intrigues, bickering, and politicking behind the back of the army and the people turned out to be the greatest catastrophe. The destruction of the army and the state, loss of huge territories, resulting in a tragedy and a civil war. Russians were killing Russians, brothers killing brothers. The beneficiaries of that were the various political chevaliers, I love that he threw that in there, of fortune and foreign powers who divided the country and tore it into parts. We will not let this happen again. We will protect our people and state from any threats, including internal betrayal. What we're facing is exactly a betrayal. So the idea that they're just going to like, you know what? Yeah, time out. We're fine. Just turn around and go back and everything will be as normal again. I promise. I'll forget, we'll forgive and forget, is an absurdity. I repeat, and he goes, I repeat, and any internal mutiny is a deadly threat to our state, to us as a nation. It is a blow against Russia, against our people, and our actions to defend the fatherland from such a threat will be brutal. That doesn't sound unlike somebody who's ready to kiss and make up in that regard. Johnny, we have time for another question before we get to the break. Yeah. All
right. So here's one. It's kind of a short but big question. What does this mean for Crimea?
I don't think this. Well, it changes things for Crimea only in the sense that I think Ukraine's military is now just going to be dominant.
Yes.
We have been looking at a slow and steady. And again, Hal, you and I have talked about this many, many times. This offensive has heretofore been about moving the ball down the field. You might get 2 or 3 yards on this play, 5 yards on that, but as long as you're moving the ball down towards the end zone, eventually you're going to get there. The end zone being Crimea, or at least the land bridge connected to Crimea. That may change swiftly. Because if you, again, if you are a Russian soldier in a trench right now and you've got a civil war fomenting back home, are you really going to stand up and give your all to fight against a Ukrainian onslaught? No, you're not. You're going to bail and start heading the other direction back home
Right.
to deal with a worsening situation there. So I think the potential is there for Crimea being regained, brought back into
Reclaimed.
Ukraine,
Yeah.
reclaimed, sooner than had been anticipated. It was going to happen eventually, I believe, but it might happen sooner because the Russians might fall apart. Again, this is something I said since the beginning of the war.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. Everything
And then
happens.
it all happens, right? Then it's a big shock to everybody, just like 91. That's why there's so many parallels that people are making. I think you've seen them about now and 1991 when the USSR fell. That it was like, we know they're on their heels, but how this could go for decades, I guess. And then all of a sudden, overnight, everything changes. The similar thing seems to be happening, and in sort of related news to that. And in the question people were asking, Ukrainian forces have taken control of several positions near Krasnoyarivka, which Russia has held since 2014. They have finally crossed into territory that was part of the Donbass held by the Russians since 2014. We have moved past reclaiming the territory since last year and now moved into reclaiming territory that they have held since 2014. That is a major turning point, and this was before all this. This was earlier yesterday, before all this stuff started happening. So this will accelerate to some degree. And once they get past the mined areas, which are largely the front area, get around it or over it or through it, it will be a much faster element. The question I have a question for Phil, and he can think about it during the break as well, is in its relation to, let's say, we've got a relatively failed state and all this kind of stuff. To one of the first concessions that the new Russian government, as it's being formed, while it's on its heels to keep itself from being overrun by, every one of its neighbors, not us, but we'll talk about Kazakhstan on the way back. What their response was, very, very Kadyrov-like in their response. That will they just say, we're going back to the 91 borders. We're moving our people out. Everybody out, and just do it like that. In a process of, we've got too many fish to fry in our own country. Get everybody out of there, because we can't do this and have enough security in our own country at the same time. Does that happen in a minute? Now, and you'll have to answer that on the other side of the break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hal Sparks Radio program, Mega Worldwide, talking about the Russian Civil War. Welcome back. It's I have some questions for Phil, and one of the ones that I asked him going into this was about Tokayev, the head of Kazakhstan, who Putin called for help, essentially. Here's what he's doing. He's shoring up allies. I'm sure he made a call to the heads of the Georgian troops and the heads of the Chechen areas that they control, and he did it in Dagestan. And you know what the response in Dagestan was? People are spraying, they've got little stencils and they're spray painting "Dagestan is not Russia" on everything. There's graffiti all over the place that says, "Nope, we're out. You're done." And the head of Kazakhstan, who again has been playing this very smart, and Putin, you could argue, tried to threaten him at the beginning of the war, sending in those troops and going, "We're in control of your security, not you." He replied when Putin asked for help, "This is an internal matter for Russia," and ended the call.
Yep.
And
so it goes with empire.
Yep.
And so it goes with empire. That's it.
According to a lot of European BBC News,
Yeah.
they're saying that the Wagner Group is returning. They're turning back from Moscow right now.
Are they? Is that what the deal from that might be
Entirely
the
possible.
The Karashenko whatever kind of thing? Yeah, or Lukashenko. Son Hal Sparks, definitely follow Philip Ittner. He's a veteran. Oh, Malcolm Nance is touting your stuff right now. Yeah, it's very nice of him.
And I'm a big supporter of Malcolm as well. It's interesting that they say that they're turning around and coming back. If they hold really what it is if they hold Rostov, if they entrench themselves in Rostov, they could really screw things up for the Russian military efforts in Ukraine, which is kind of their bargaining chip in many different ways. Or as long as they hold that, that they can exert influence. To a lesser extent, for Voronezh, because that's close, that's within spitting distance of Moscow. But I'm not terribly surprised that they're turning away from the capital, because that was going to be a fight. That was going to be if indeed this is true, and if indeed this is not just some sort of feint or temporary withdrawal. So okay, I'm digesting this as we speak. I think the other thing is also that if they were going to go for Moscow, it would have been a proper full-on fight,
war,
and it would have been that would be civil war. So you can perhaps, and also in addition to that, it indicates to me that Prigozhin knows that the military forces in Moscow, unlike in Rostov, are not just going to hold open the door. Because he came into Rostov more or less unopposed, with some clashes. I mean, he shot down a helicopter. I know there were some gunfights, but by and large, he went into Rostov-on-Don unopposed. Clearly, he thinks that going for Moscow would not be unopposed, and that's this looming question: is the rank and file soldiers of the Russian military going to side with Putin and Shoigu?
Right.
Or are they going to,
We're seeing
say,
that
no, Prigozhin is
breaking
successful?
Breaking news in relation to the Lukashenko agreement. Prigozhin has issued a statement saying it's over, which, again, if you listen to what he's saying, it's crazy. He goes, they were going to dismantle PMC Wagner. Remember, he had to take his paperwork and show up, and this was a urination contest between him and Shoigu, and he showed up with the paperwork at the building, and he was rejected, and the idea was that they were going to just turn them into they were just going to cut them up and not let them exist.
And they brought charges against them.
That's right. He goes, we came out on June 23rd to the March of Justice. In a day, we walked to nearly 200 kilometers away from Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of blood of our fighters. Yeah. Now the moment has come when blood may spill. That's why, understanding the responsibility for spilling Russian blood on one of the sides, we are turning back our convoys and going back to field camps according to the plan. So I think that speaks well to your Rostov-on-Don idea, that they are going to maintain their power structure. Because, again, there's just no way that Putin lets this sit. The dude had to flee the Kremlin. What are you talking about? And there's no way these guys go back to fighting in Ukraine or trust the Ministry of Defense is going to give them stuff or not strike them again. Are you nuts? This seems more like a bait from a bait from Prigozhin than it is, and Lukashenko, than it is a tactic by Putin at this point. But again, this is just it's not that surprising.
I can't see Shoigu and Prigozhin existing on the same planet together. Right. I made a joke at the end of the last segment there about Trotsky getting an ice pick in the back of his head in Mexico after the Bolshevik Revolution. The problem in many ways with Russia's power structures, you can't let an opponent just be out there in the wind, because eventually, somebody of his supporters or something, he'll come back and there's always, that's why they kill spies who have defected to the West. No, I could see him turning around from Moscow, knowing that a fight in Moscow would be horrific for everybody.
Yeah, he's going to die. He'll die doing that.
Right. He will lose that
no
fight.
Way.
25,000 soldiers. 25,000 soldiers will not take Moscow. Not enough.
No.
So I can see him turning away from Moscow, but I don't see him changing his position. I think and again, this is early days. This is just my thought off the top of my head. My bet is he falls back to Rostov, which is you cannot conduct the war in Ukraine without Rostov. It's just it's where everything is launched from. So he falls back to Rostov, which he still has got apparently left. There's a unit of Wagner guys, a sizable unit of. This is what my Russian buddy told me. My Russian journalist buddy. He said there's a division, or there's a group. By that I mean division. A group that's been divided off from the main group, that's been left in Rostov, a group that's left in Voronezh, and then they were marching on to Moscow. I think maybe they fall back, realizing that perhaps they overextended, and this was a risky thing for Prigozhin to do. Fall back to Rostov so that you have something to negotiate with.
Right.
That's your chip. That's your bargaining chip.
And Shoigu, where is he?
That bargain.
Right.
Well, Shoigu, we haven't seen.
Right.
To my knowledge, we haven't seen since this whole dust up. We heard stories of Gerasimov getting out of Rostov like in a car racing to Moscow with Wagner guys, coming to the outskirts of Rostov. He was like, got in a car and got out of there. That's the prevailing story. But they fall back to Rostov, the military hub, the military headquarters, the command and control for the Ukrainian war. They hold that territory, and then they start negotiations on how it ends. Now, what that negotiation ends up with, I don't know. Again, I just can't
Well, and
see.
then at the same time this word is coming out that Lukashenko has talked to Prigozhin, and arguably this might, it's one of those things where this might have been the plan all along. Scare the crap out of Putin, get what you want, hold on to this, take over the military. He becomes the military head, and then somebody else is like, whatever, it doesn't matter. But according to, like, just 2 hours before, Putin put out a statement apparently that he wants to kill Prigozhin and is ready to grant amnesty to all Wagner PMC fighters who liquidate him. That was like 2 hours ago.
Wagner is Prigozhin. Prigozhin is Wagner.
Yes.
If you get rid of Prigozhin, and you give amnesty to the fighters who have been, alongside Wagner, that would. Then basically you return to a bit of a status quo, but again, with a deeply damaged Putin. There's no scenario where Putin comes out of this unscathed. So we'll see. I just, falling. He knew he couldn't take Moscow.
Take Moscow, right? So now with 25,000 guys,
he's
right?
Falling back. No, not with 25,000 guys. So now he's falling back on Rostov. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I think look, I've had many people tell me today that they think Prigozhin rolled the dice. He took too high of a risk, and he's going to pay for it. That there's no way out of this for Prigozhin either. So we will say. I can't. He will have to go out at the very least.
Okay,
he's going to be in exile out of
there's
Russia.
more information about Lukashenko's offer. He apparently, and this is, again, is coming in hot, so we're not 100% sure of the details of this, but he proposed that if Prigozhin quits his Moscow campaign, the leadership of the Ministry of Defense will resign, and Prigozhin will be able to focus on projects in Africa. What did I say? Bug out of the country and go kill Africans. That will let you do your favorite thing. And you can go make money killing Africans, and that'll be that. And you'll basically exile. We'll give you like lots of money in exile if you just stop killing. Which means he's going to take all those Wagner fighters with him, the 6,000 base fighters that are actually trained, not the ones that have been assigned to him. And those guys will get dropped into the Ministry of Defense. And then what happens? Putin puts the next two idiots in the Pez dispenser in charge of the Russian fighting force? Like, what are you talking about? Prigozhin responded, realizing all the responsibility of the fact, okay, we saw that part. There is no way this dude survives if he just bugs off to Africa.
No, well, yes, eventually he will fall out of a window.
Yes.
But I also see I see the sense in not making him Minister of Defense, because then that gives him, he benefits from this massive incursion, which is going to screw up the war effort, and Putin is, I'm sure, furious at him. So he's not going to be Minister of Defense. So get him out of the country, send him to Moscow, or send him to Africa, or let him go to Africa, and then he gets what he wants in that Shoigu and Gerasimov. So he gets to save face there. Putin survives, not as bad as it could have been, because it's the Boyar thing that I keep going back to. If he is seen to be the one in control of all these guys who are running around doing their own thing, and everybody's so chaotic and Russian against Russian. Well, I'm the one who's going to broker this. I mean, because Putin will eventually take credit for this. Lukashenko will not get credit for this.
No.
He will have done what I say happens in these fights between boyars, and he will be able to scapegoat. Actually, in many ways, maybe this is the best option for Putin, because he gets to scapegoat both Shoigu and Prigozhin.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I still think Putin comes out of this looking bad, because it's sheer and utter chaos.
Yeah,
And,
I mean,
and
there are troops in the air.
That wouldn't happen anymore.
Right. There are troops in the air flying from Ukraine to Moscow right now, apparently, to protect the city, because this was all happening. There is not a thread of live and let live in Vladimir Putin, and I don't no. Prigozhin can't be that stupid. He has to know that this has got to be a feint, a fallback, or he's got another plan. Because if he doesn't get rid of Putin at this point, he's done. This is like a mafia movie at this point. Crazy. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. The news is happening as we do the show. Very exciting today. Lots going on. And by the way, all of it, good news for Ukraine. We'll be back. So obviously a lot going on as we've learned. I think that there is going to be a piece of good news from this, is that a direct firefight between the Wagner guys and outside of Moscow would have resulted in just massive casualties. That because Putin's regulars don't have the either the soldiers or the means to stop it, they would have had to resort to large, violent artillery strikes and bombs from the air and that kind of stuff. Which, if you remember, remind everybody, if you could, Phil, the Chechen theater hostage crisis. Remember that under Putin?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where the Chechens, and I want to say something like 2003 or something like that, infiltrated a theater, a concert hall, and the Russians' response to it was to gas everybody. They gassed the entire concert hall. They were not very precise with their mixing of the narcotics that they used, or the gas, the agent that they used, and they killed everybody. They killed a whole chunk of people, Chechens, concert goers, all the rest of it, because it's there. If you look at if everything is a nail, then a hammer is the only tool you use. Not only that, but also we know that the Russians during that concert, they came in, they found Chechens who were still alive, and they shot them. They executed them, headshots. Which sounds tough and mean, and don't mess with the Russians. It's dumb.
Yeah.
If they were still alive, get them out, get them to a medical center, and then press them for information. But no, Russia just I don't like you, kill you.
Yep. It's kind of a scorched earth. They have a scorched earth attitude towards things like this, especially when they're violently embarrassing. And so and there's footage now of Lukashenko. I don't know where he is per se, but he apparently is. He's at one of the barriers.
Is there a guy with a big shawarma thing? And there's they're all wearing fezzes.
Nope.
And
he's standing. He's just standing. He's wearing all military gear and a bulletproof vest, and he's giving the thumbs up to a bunch of lines of cops, basically saying, "You guys won't have to have the Wagner guys roll over you today," and they're all applauding. And but that's the current state of the negotiation. That said, here's what I think we can say unequivocally based on this. Wagner is out in Ukraine. There is no situation where the Wagner group is fighting alongside regular Russian forces anymore. And considering they were arguably the biggest push force, the only push force in the entire Russian military column, that's a big plus for Ukrainians. Secondly, the trust back and forth, they're going to shift over some of these guys, I guess the prisoners who were working under Wagner, who they were blaming their stuff on the paramilitary guys, into the regular military groups and into the regular Russian army. That's not going to be fun. And again, what do you think right now if you're a Russian soldier and you're fighting going in, which way is your gun pointing right now? It's got to be maddening.
No, I think this is the happy ending. Here's the happy ending. This means Ukraine, I think, we are looking hopefully at the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. I'm now, maybe, again, people criticize me for anticipating that too frequently. But first off, I don't, my position on this, how Russia has no way of winning here. That's just a starting point.
Right.
Regardless of any these other factors, Ukraine will never submit to Russian dominance ever again. But I do think that this infighting, because this isn't over. This is not over. Even if he pulls back to Rostov and they make some sort of agreement, you're off to Africa or whatever, there is still this issue of Russians will no longer, because Russians, they get, there's basically one information source, and that's the state. You can't ignore this.
Yeah.
So there's clearly friction internally within Russia, and that's going to cause the Russian population to also go, well, what is this friction? Why is there this friction? And I've been promised peace and stability from you, and this is not peace and stability. This was supposed to be a short military operation. You've had 2 mobilizations of 2.5, and you've got, we're on the verge of a civil war sort of thing. What the F is going on? This is nothing but bad news for Putin, nothing but bad news for Russia. It hobbles their military war effort. Holding Rostov hostage is not going to work well for Prigozhin or for Putin. And I think all of this means that we see Ukraine. I don't want to jinx it, but making good strides, and I think it's the writing's on the wall. Eventually, Ukraine is victorious, and Russia will have to look in the mirror and do the hard work that it's had to do for centuries.
Think about how embarrassing the Belgorod attack was just a couple of weeks ago, and this was
multiply it by like a good 20 or 50. I don't want to say 100, but it's like, this is a massive thing.
Yes.
He's
again,
not in control, and it shows Putin's not in control.
Right, especially because Lukashenko is the guy who negotiated this, this kind of temporary stand down.
The Tsar cannot get his hands dirty. The Tsar cannot be brought down to human level. He has to be above it all. This is his whole mystique, is that it's all these guys fighting amongst themselves below the Tsar. If only the Tsar could, if he could just get these people to behave properly, as if he's like not involved already. You better bet that Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has been on the phone to every single, power broker that he's got in his sphere of influence. And he's still going to come up lacking in this.
Kazakhstan told him to go pound sand. Kazakhstan told him to go pound sand. So did Iran. Apparently, he called Iran, the leaders of Iran, and briefed them on this and looked for their support. And none was there to be had. And eventually, it was the idea was Lukashenko bartering this deal to get rid of Shoigu, and maybe that was enough for him right now, but then who replaces them? And again, they're not going to be fighting alongside. I don't know what kind of an idiot he would have to be to take them at their word. That
Wagner's not going back into Ukraine. There's no way. No way. They don't. There's no trust. And also, There's a lot of munitions around in Ukraine. If Yevgeny Prigozhin decides to go back into Ukraine, there's every chance in the world that oops, I dropped this hand grenade. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's it for him. So, I mean, could still happen in Africa as well. Look, this is not over. This is still in a very volatile, very unpredictable.
Well, the Chechens just arrived in the Rostov region, apparently, as sort of backfill slash flanking maneuver, and that was part of the threat. I think that Lukashenko was maybe making.
Entirely possible. Yeah.
Yep. But that doesn't mean that's how it's going to shake out, and it might mean that they, in Rostov they have a meeting of the minds. Good Lord. While Wagner is trying to overthrow,
or they get into a conflict, or they get into a Kadyrov. There's no love lost between Kadyrov and Prigozhin.
Right.
There was a time they were buddy, but I think those days are long gone. No, this is still very volatile. I think this is going to get worse before it gets better for all sides involved in Russia.
Yeah.
It's great for the Ukrainians, but it's still it's too volatile, and I don't think this ends well for anybody. And it's
we'll watch it. We're going to watch it play out. We're at the end of the show, and we're seeing
inevitably we are heading to a place where Putin is either completely lame duck or he's out of power. It's inevitable at this point. He is too damaged.
Yeah, I like the political fallout will be the thing we will be watching over the next couple of days, and they're taking the day off on Monday because they're expecting it. We'll see if this it buttons it up nicely, or if it's just another bad mile marker. Thanks so much, Philip, for joining us today. Thanks everybody in the chat for coming in with your questions. And Johnny Million, thank you for farming our questions and the like. And we will see you guys next week, where I have no doubt it will seem like 100 years have passed in the history of Russia because of what will go on this week. I'll be covering it as well during the week on my show. Wednesday, I'm at Flappers for all the patreon.com/HalSparks. You guys get to watch that show and for free and all that stuff. And we will see you next week. Take care, everybody.